Welcome to this explainer. You know, overthinking isn't actually a sign that you're just being super thoughtful or intelligent. In fact, usually, the more we overthink, the less clearly we see things. So today we're going to dive into the fascinating neurobiology behind overthinking, and more importantly, uncover some actionable, evidence-based ways to finally break the cycle.
Tell me if this sounds familiar. Have you ever found yourself totally trapped in a mental loop after a completely normal conversation, just replaying every single word? Or maybe you agonized over whether you said the wrong thing, or worried that you looked foolish to your friends or coworkers. Or spent hours imagining literally every possible worst-case scenario before you've even taken a single step? Well, if that sounds like you are definitely not alone. And the best part? It is not a character flaw. It's just biology.
Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll quickly cover what overthinking actually is, why our brains do it, what's happening inside the overthinking brain, why it feels so impossible to stop, and finally, how to break the cycle. Let's jump right into part 1. What is overthinking? The mental trap. We really need to start by defining what's actually happening when our thoughts get stuck on repeat. Clinically speaking, overthinking is called perseverative cognition. That's a mouthful, but it basically just means continuously thinking about negative events without ever reaching a useful conclusion. It's the stark difference between actually solving a problem and just getting trapped inside one.
Psychologists usually break this down into two specific forms. On one hand, we've got rumination, which is constantly replaying the past. Think, why did I say that? On the other hand, we have worry, which is focusing entirely on the future, like, what if I fail? Both of these leave us completely mentally exhausted.
Now, it's absolutely vital to separate rumination from healthy reflection. Rumination is a passive, endless negative loop. Healthy reflection, though, is active problem solving. It's the kind of thinking that actually leads to self-awareness and personal growth.
Dr. Jacqueline Oltz, a Harvard-affiliated psychiatrist, brilliantly captures this. She describes rumination as getting stuck in a conversation with yourself. It's this closed, exhausting mental loop that just tanks your mood and steals your focus away from the things you'd actually rather be doing.
Moving on to part 2, why our brains overthink, from the savannah to the smartphone. Let's look at the evolutionary origins of why this even happens.
Here's something super interesting. Your brain isn't actually trying to torture you. It's an ancient survival mechanism trying to protect you. Thousands of years ago, constantly scanning for danger literally kept us alive. But today, your brain often can't distinguish between physical danger and emotional uncertainty. So it treats a job interview or an unread text message like a wild animal, tricking you into thinking that if you just obsess over it long enough, you'll finally find certainty.
To understand how this happens on a physical level, we have to look at what's called the triple network model. Basically, there's a constant balancing act happening between three major brain networks. You've got the salience network, which is your brain's alarm system, the central executive network, which is the logical planner we use for focused tasks, and the default mode network, which is kind of like the brain's idle engine, responsible for mind wandering and self-reflection.
Which brings us to part 3, inside the overthinking brain, the network model. Let's pop the hood and look at the specific neuroscience driving this mental traffic jam. So, there's a key neurobiological rule at play here called anti-correlation. Simply put, when your mind-wandering default mode network is highly active, your focused logical executive network gets suppressed. You just cannot efficiently pay strict attention to a task, while simultaneously letting your mind wander off into deep self-analysis.
The real kicker is what happens under stress. When your brain's alarm system, specifically the amygdala, sounds the alarm over a perceived threat, it creates high emotional arousal. And this excessive arousal actually weakens the prefrontal cortex, which is your executive control center. With that executive control weakened, those repetitive, unhelpful default mode thoughts just intrude uncontrollably. You literally lose your cognitive flexibility.
That leads perfectly into part 4, why it feels impossible to stop, the science of habit. Because if you've ever felt like you physically cannot stop worrying, there is a very real, biological reason for that. It all comes down to neuroplasticity. This is your brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections based on repeated experiences. Every single time you revisit a worry, your brain physically changes to accommodate that thought pattern. But neuroplasticity is a double-edged sword. You've probably heard the phrase, neurons that fire together, wire together. Well, repeatedly looping negative thoughts literally paves a dirt road of worry into a massive superhighway. You are quite literally practicing worry, which makes your brain so much more efficient at doing it.
You see, overthinking creates this tricky illusion of progress. It makes you feel productive, but trying to accomplish something through rumination is honestly like using a rocking chair. You're in motion, you're rehearsing the problem, but you aren't actually moving forward.
Finally, Part 5. How to break the cycle and rewire the brain. How do we use this exact same science to actively rewire our brains and break the loop for good?
Let's look at 3 highly practical strategies. First up, cognitive distancing. Acknowledge that you're ruminating and name the pattern. Try writing your thoughts down in the third person to create some psychological distance from the emotion. Second, shift from what if to what is. Overthinking lives in imaginary futures, so anchor yourself by asking what facts you actually know right now. Remember, facts calm the brain while stories fuel anxiety. Third is worry postponement. Give yourself a strict 10-minute alarm later in the day, say at 4 p.m., exclusively to worry. Outside of that window, you just have to postpone it.
You can also nurture positive neuroplasticity every day with a few simple tactics. Try cognitive diffusion. Instead of saying, I am failing, say, I am noticing the thought that I am failing. It completely strips the thought of its power. You can also practice present moment mindfulness to shift away from that default mode network, or physically change locations to create new headspace, maybe by stepping outside into nature. Even taking just one small, reasonable action can break the paralysis and snap you out of the mental loop.
Because of neuroplasticity, every single time you choose to interrupt an overthinking loop with one of these strategies, you are physically rewiring your brain for peace and clarity. So I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought. The next time that internal alarm goes off, will you stay trapped in the loop or will you step into the present?